We have a mission. We fight for the truth in a team effort. And Buck is back with our next play.
Hey, it is America Now. Buck Sexton's on vacation. Bryan Suits here. Hour number 3, filling in today, tomorrow, and then next week. My home base is KFI Radio in Los Angeles, where I host the Dark Secret Place, America's premier radio show on the world melting down and other craziness that happens only behind the blue curtain that is the state of California. We'll talk a lot about North Korea here in the next couple breaks, and then at the end of the hour, we'll be joined by a friend of mine, former Delta Force operator, Tom Bigley, now retired with about 7 years of experience on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan as a soldier and a private contractor. My background, by the way, I didn't do this at the setup of the show, but my background is I've been in radio since 1991 when I returned from the Gulf War as a field medic. And the LA riots were the next time I was in uniform. And I continued in radio and moved to some other radio stations. In 1998, I went to Bosnia when I was an NCO as a sergeant for the peacekeeping mission in Bosnia in 1998-99. And then after the 9/11 terror attacks, I was working at Cairo Radio in Seattle as a talk show host. And I was in the 41st Infantry Brigade in the Oregon Army National Guard. And the state of Oregon, after 9/11, said, well, we're going to war, and so who amongst you has a college degree, is an NCO with a combat deployment? And those of us who raised our hands, just weeks later, were officers after officer candidate school. So I went to Iraq as an infantry officer in an infantry battalion, where I was wounded several times and awarded the Bronze Star. And this all is incidental to the fact that I was a pretty badass music DJ, primarily in alternative music, because I started at the nation's leading alternative station in LA. But then after I got back from Bosnia, I got into talk radio at Cairo Radio in Seattle. And then, as I say, after 9/11, I deployed, came back, stayed in talk radio, and that's where you find me now. Now here at KFI in Los Angeles. I'm very much a bit of an odd duck. Especially when it comes to Los Angeles, being in conservative radio and being one of my, besides Buck, the only person with practical experience actually on the ground in uniform or in service to the country who's doing talk radio. So that's why it's always a pleasure to fill in for Buck, because Buck and I see eye to eye on a lot of things that we can never talk about on the radio. So you should know that about him, and you should know that about me. Is that there's stuff, if you're listening in on us sitting at a bar somewhere, you'll hear the stuff that we can never talk about on the air. So there's that. So anyway, let's talk brass tacks about North Korea. And the United States is in sort of a position not exactly of our wish, but of our own, not of our own making, but the United States national policy. And we have to get back to fundamentals on this. National policy from the 80s on, when it wasn't, it was thought to be years in advance. But you know what's funny is, in the 80s, it was thought that the North Koreans were 20 years away from a nuke. And you know what? It turns out we were right. We just didn't know that they had put the spurs, to the horse on that one. But both George Bushes, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama all stated officially, is when the president of the United States states a foreign policy end state, that's policy. When Barack Obama says Assad must go, and he did several times, and when both of his secretaries of state, Hillary and Lurch, both said Assad must go, that's our national policy. He has to go. But then Barack Obama did a 180 on that and said, okay, he doesn't have to, I meant he has to go to the shower. He has to go to the buffet, and don't miss those shrimp. They're phenomenal. So Assad doesn't have to go. And that was a ludicrous backstroke on a national policy that never should have been stated out loud. But we have Democrat and Republicans stated over and over that North Korea will not get a nuclear weapon. And if you're unaware of the distinction, if you think the distinction is without a difference, and let me spell this out for you. North Korea does not have a nuclear weapon right now. I know they've done 6 nuclear tests, with a 7th probably around the corner. Somewhere between now and January 8th, which is Kim Jong-un's birthday, there might be a nuclear test. And I know you're saying, well, they do have a nuclear weapon. Here's what they have. They have a mountain, and they have a mine shaft, and down that mine shaft, they dig various spur mine shafts, and they blow up the mountain. So do they have a nuclear weapon? Well, yeah, they do. They keep nuking the same mountain. Do they have ICBMs? Well, they have a large one that, frankly, we predicted, but we didn't quite see it coming this fast, that they tested a month and a half ago, that because of time of flight, because of its ability to go 10 times higher than the International Space Station, because it flew for nearly 50 minutes, they do have an ICBM that, if our projections are correct, could lob a 500-pound warhead, like the H-bomb that they tested 3 months ago, could lob that anywhere in continental North America, continental United States. But the big gap is they haven't put that warhead on that missile. So, no, they don't have a nuclear weapon. A weapon you can employ against an enemy. They have a nuclear bomb, and they blow up a mountain. Now, they could duct tape it to a donkey, but the donkey would collapse because it can't carry a 500-pound warhead. So do they have a nuclear weapon? No, they don't. But the money, the smart money is on them putting that weapon on that missile by the end of the year. So the window's closing on what we said, which is the United States will not allow or tolerate a nuclear North Korea. So we said that. That's policy. So somewhere between now that they don't have one and sometime next year or early 2019, when they do put that weapon on that missile and they launch it and they test it in their own sovereign territory, which they're allowed to do. You know why? Because the UN is afraid to do anything about North Korea. That's when the window closes. When that missile that could reach Florida has that nuclear weapon. So sometime between now and then, we have to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon. And why do we have to do this? Now, if you're one of the people out there saying, yeah, but we have that missile defense system, the GMD, the ground-based mid-course defense system in Alaska and in California, and to get a missile from North Korea to Keokuk, Iowa, or Lodge Grass, Montana, it's got to go up over Siberia, over Alaska, over the pole, over Canada, and then down to North Dakota, Montana, Iowa, whatever. And we're going to shoot it down mid-course. That's what that missile system's for. We spent $40 billion in 20 years getting that thing ready for this moment. So since we have that, who cares if the North Koreans have a nuke? Well, here's what the Pentagon has not wanted to say out loud for the past year. Is that missile system? We don't really have that. We have a base at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California and Fort Greely, Alaska, and there are many dozens of those launchers. But do they succeed every time? Well, no, they don't. Because here's the sad part about our missile defense, is that when we test it, it's a telegraphed punch. The missile crews are informed, next month we're doing a live fire. The missile will launch from the Western Pacific, the island of Kwajalein, and it will come up towards Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, or it'll be launched, it'll be pooped out the back of a plane, and then the test ICBM will come in towards Alaska. So you'll know where it's coming from. So the bottom line, the missile crews always know when they test the ground-based missile defense, the GMD missile, they always know the date and time it's happening. They're part of the test. There's no surprise tests. And even in that laboratory environment, even in that choreographed, scripted, tested environment, the ground-based missile defense missiles are barely over 60% successful, even when they know it's coming. The guy is on the mount, and he's saying, okay, here comes a curve, half-speed curve. Here it comes. It's going to go up, left, down towards the strike zone. Are you ready? Here it comes. Here comes my curve. Here's the curve. whoa, there's a curve. And 40% of the time, the batter's striking out. So that's not exactly confidence-inducing, right? Well, that's the reason that the president announced on the 23rd, on Christmas Eve, not only talking about the Republican tax bill, but also announcing that $4.6 billion plus, it'll total $10 billion, is going to the missile defense system, the GMD. Because right now, we don't have a deterrent. If we could shoot down North Korean missiles, we would simply say to them, okay, whatever, welcome to the nuclear club, but you need to know something, that if you ever try to launch a first strike against us, it will not succeed, and we will not forgive you. We will shoot them down, they will burn up in the atmosphere, and then we will retaliate, and it will be the end of your country. That would be a good deterrent, but we don't have that deterrent, and here's the problem, is that the North Koreans know this, because their missile experts might be starving, and they might have roundworms, and they might have the sort of Damocles over their head if they fail, but they can do math, and they do understand that the American missile defense system in 2017 is not what it's advertised to be, and that the tests have been choreographed like a chorus line, and that all the North Koreans have to do is just not launch one missile at a time, launch many missiles, and only one of them has to be the nuke, but we don't know which one it is, so we have to try to intercept each missile. So in order to cover ourselves, we have to overlap that. We have to target each missile with 3 of our missiles. So if they launch 10 missiles and only one of them has a nuke, we have to launch at least 30 missiles to get a reasonable chance of shooting them down. Now, because what I just said has a lot of math and a lot of background, and I'm a field artillery officer, and so ballistics is kind of my thing, because it requires a lot of, elbow grease and reading, that's why you haven't heard what I just said in the national media. But the Pentagon knows that the jig is up, and they've informed Trump. Trump is going to fund an improvement on this, so there will be more missile launchers. But that's the danger that we're in. If people think that we're rushing to war, well, what we're rushing to do is shut our own window of vulnerability, is to get to a point where it doesn't matter if he has a nuke. Because we are his target. China's not his target. Russia's not his target. Believe it or not, even South Korea's not his target. We're his target. But it only makes us vulnerable if we can't shoot it down. Right now, the Pentagon can't guarantee that. And so they either need to perfect that or stop him before he is able to put a nuke on that missile. One of those two things. So which one happens more quickly? That we improve the anti-ballistic missile system, called the GMD, before the end of 2019, or he successfully puts his H-bomb on that ICBM before we can guarantee that we can shoot it down. Would you want to live in an America where the U.S. Army, which runs a ground-based missile defense, couldn't guarantee to intercept an incoming North Korean missile? We don't pretend to intercept Russian incoming missiles. That's the point of deterrence. Where we're dealing with an asymmetric threat. We're dealing with a religious cult called North Korea, where military success is the nectar of the gods, and they now have it. And the golden ring is having a nuclear missile, not a missile that can get to America, but a nuclear missile. At which point, the religious cult says to Kim Jong-un, what's the point of having it if we can't use it? We'll be back in just a minute. Add Dark Secret Place on the Tweeter machine. Add me on Twitter, and I can talk to you directly, answer your questions, etc. Bryan sits in for Buck Sexton. You've got America Now.
From shopping season to return season.
We don't have a defense for North Korea launching a single nuclear strike, just to teach us a lesson. And if you're wondering how they would do it, they wouldn't launch a single missile. They would launch a bunch of decoy missiles. They would, because they're mass producing the ICBM that they tested a month and a half ago. Well, whenever they test something, they already are mass producing it. Their tests are validations. They're not actually diagnostics. And they would shower the American missile defense system because they know the vulnerability is in the reliance of our own missiles, not the reliance of theirs. That we're going to shoot down everything that comes over the horizon from North Korea. We're going to assume everything has the nuke on it. But in all likelihood, the first missile over the horizon is not going to have the nuke on it. What they're going to do is deplete the missiles that are in fixed silos at Fort Greely, Alaska. And at Vandenberg Air Force Base in Los Angeles, there's 2. And it takes hours to reload. It's not like a magazine in a rifle. And the North Koreans know this. And they know that it is part of their religious cult. Because if you think North Korea is a communist country, then you are still stuck in the Cold War. It took the Soviet Union's money, all they would give them. But North Korea has never been communist. It's been more like ancient Egypt, with a sun god in charge, ordering the construction of dams and railroads and nuclear bombs and the whole thing. And worship of the Kim, whichever Kim progeny is ruling the country at the time, you worship. You worship them by applauding as you cry, taking copious notes. Whenever he walks around, you'll notice that everyone around him has a notebook, because his dad, Kim Jong-il, same thing. Every time he's photographed walking around with the troops, people are taking notes. And that started with his dad, Kim Il-sung, the founder of modern North Korea, who the Soviet Union put in there. But it has more to do with of marshaling ancient Korean monarchic and God worship religions than the adoption of communism. And so part of the mother's milk that keeps the Kim crime family in charge is the constant promise to their military that they will get the majority of the food that's grown, the resources that are manufactured, trucks, batteries, shoes, whatever, that the Army comes first. And that's actually a policy in North Korea called Army First. And what that's led to is the North Korean Army and a belief amongst the Korean people, the North Korean people, that they are a special clean people, and the rest of you are not clean. That they are the cleanest race, and that it's their destiny to unite the peninsula. And what's the point of pouring all this money into nuclear weapons if they don't use them? And so Kim Jong-un is going to be in a position when and if later this year they put an H-bomb that they've tested successfully on that missile. He then has to either tell his army, great, now we just sit here and threaten the Americans. And they're going to say, what's the point of making it if we don't use it? Because we know we can get it through. We know that the Americans are soft. We've been hearing this since 1953, that we defeated them. They didn't overrun us. We defeated them. They asked for a ceasefire and armistice. And that we are a great people. We are a brave people. And if we destroy Seattle or Denver, they will not fight us. They will say, not the face, no more, please. And we need to send them that message. And that's what they're saying. So you should really honestly fear them getting a nuke, because it was entirely predictable. When India developed and tested nuclear weapons, it was a gimme. It was a no-brainer that Pakistan would develop them, specifically for the purpose to tell India, we will not have any more of these wars like 72 when you kicked our ass. You have nukes, we have nukes. Now, let's not attack each other. And that's called deterrence. And it worked since the end of World War II with the Soviet Union and the United States. It was costly, and it made sense to anyone who understood the theory of deterrence, and it worked. And the proof is in the pudding. But we've never faced an asymmetric threat with basically a virtual death cult in North Korea with nuclear weapons, who frankly don't care if we retaliate. Because here's the other thing they've been doing since 1953. They've been preparing for retaliation. And so the working plan, and later on this hour we'll talk with former Delta Force operator Tom Bigley about some of this stuff with North Korea, but the working plan, the best scenario, short of going to full-on war with North Korea until they eliminate their nuclear weapons, is what's called a bloody nose strike. And this would be American aircraft from aircraft carriers from Guam, even possibly from Alaska, but not from South Korean bases and not from Japanese bases. It would be an American operation with an American face on it taking out over 3 or 4 nights 700 targets in North Korea. And this is based on the assumption that we could actually threaten the North Koreans. After we do that, we take out their ICBM complexes, their research facilities, their manufacturing facilities, that we then say to them, don't retaliate on South Korea. Don't flatten Seoul with your artillery, or else we'll really give it to you. It's kind of a big assumption, but that is the war plan that's being bandied about right now, that this could actually be done over 3 or 4 nights, and North Korea would learn their lesson and get a bloody nose. I think it underestimates North Korea. All right, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the tax relief bill, how it's being received in media, and more around the country. Bryan is filling in from Los Angeles for Buck Sexton. You've got America Now.
USA Radio News with Rod Williams-Dole.
We will be joined by former Delta Force operator Tom Bigley in the next break, final break, talking about the reality of a strike against North Korea, war with North Korea, and more. But a lot of rants this year, a really unusual crop of some on-air craziness that, obviously is triggered by a President Trump, by an entire media that could not envision, and a political strata. I mean, you hear in Buck's intro Nancy Pelosi saying, what did she say? There will not be a President Trump, and you can take that to the bank or whatever. People whose reality and assumptions were absolutely upended a little over a year ago. And the rants happened in front of cameras. And this is a good one. Climate change. Trump's announcement that he would not follow the Paris Accord. And this, followed on the heels of the media looking at some of his appointees, Ryan Zinke, the Interior Secretary, and some of the hyperventilation, without any examination of, who exactly who were some of the experts of the Obama administration appointed to positions that they were not qualified for. But suddenly they dusted off that magnifying glass for the Trump administration. But anyway, here's a montage of some of the media's climate change hysteria. We call this Cut 5.
On a sunny day in the Rose Garden, what could be defined and construed as a dark speech.
It's a momentous moment and a very ominous moment. It seems clear that he's mad. He has some rage.
He is not helping the forgotten American. He is hurting them. Their kids will have worse asthma in the summer. They will have a harder time having economic growth. He's made us an environmental pariah in the world, and I think it is one of the most self-destructive moves I've ever seen.
The message to the world is not good. I've asked specifically CEOs from India to Europe to China what they thought, as well as the American CEOs, and they said this is bad for the American brand.
This will be the day that the United States resigned as the leader of the free world.
The climate is actually a science issue, and the climate's going to continue warming regardless of what his base wants, or it's actually science. It's not politics.
It is settled science, unlike the identity of Jim at this point. We're still we're still on the case with that one.
I can assure you, France will not give up the fight. Make our planet great again.
I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
Ouch. They didn't like that in Europe, did they? Here's the thing that I think a lot of people in the media are missing. That when a federal judge in Seattle becomes the 4th judge to strike down or find the immigration slowdown or ban unconstitutional, that becomes a campaign commercial for Trump, because he said he would do this. he's trying to do this, and these liberal judges right out of central casting are right on cue interfering with him on something that is actually in his wheelhouse. It is executive policy. It is in the purview of the executive to tell the State Department who gets to come in and who does not get to come in. It always has been. State Department doesn't work for Congress. They don't work for Article 3 for the Supreme Court. They work for the executive. Okay, that's his department. That's his purview. Some senator from Wyoming or, well, New York doesn't get to say who gets to come in this country. It's just not how it works. However, on the climate stuff, Trump is expressing skepticism on climate change, which is the biggest sin in media and Hollywood. If you're someone who challenges that climate change is causing wildfires, then you're a heretic. And here's how I always parse it. Here's how I always explain it to the outraged class here in Los Angeles and in California. And it's this. I don't know any conservatives who deny that the climate is changing. But unlike most liberals, the conservatives who are boned up on this issue are aware that the climate is always changing. And that's a big difference between the informed conservative and the typical liberal who has no idea that the climate has changed in the past. It's been warmer in the past. They have no clue. They think that this is the climate, that this is optimal. And any change to this is a bad thing. They don't understand that the climate is always changing. And there's two questions that I always ask people whenever we're debating climate change. I always ask them, has it been warmer in the past? If they don't know that answer, then they're not serious people. And I always ask them, what percentage of the Earth's atmosphere is CO2? Has it ever been more in the past? If they don't know that answer, they're not serious people. They're Ken Olin, the writer of This Is Us, or they're Janine Garofalo or whoever. If they're unaware that it was warmer in the past, I'm not talking 40 million years ago. I'm talking about when they grew wine grapes in England during the time of Chaucer. Okay, read the Canterbury Tales. They were getting all hooched up on grapes they were growing. And then, oh, by the way, yes, the ice is receding on Greenland. It's getting thicker in the middle, but it's receding on the edges. You know what it's revealing? Farms. Farms from the 900s and the 800s. Yes, they farmed on Greenland. Greenland, which was deceptively named so that people would go there. Yes, there were farms. As the ice is receding, it's revealing ancient farms from the Middle Ages. So yes, it was warmer in the past. Are polar bears 200 years old? Did somebody invent polar bears 200 years ago? No, polar bears have been around for millennia. And apparently they can survive a warm spell. But then these are the kind of inconvenient facts that don't get grants. They don't get grant money in Paris. They don't get grant money in Berlin. They don't get grant money in Britain. There are no grants for informing the public that the climate is always changing. Now, this is a real frustration for me in California because we're dealing with these wildfires. The largest fire in California, this is what they'll say. The largest fire in California history is still going. This one that you've been seeing for 3 weeks around Santa Barbara. And, of course, Oprah's home is threatened. And Al Gore's home. When he divorced Tipper, he left her in Tennessee, and he came out to Santa Barbara to this beautiful home that he bought right after he sold current TV to Al Jazeera. So Al Gorezira buys this phenomenal view home, and it's threatened by a wildfire. And, of course, Al Gore blames it on global warming. What Al Gore is not aware of is that larger fires happened in the past before we recorded them. This is the largest fire in recorded history, which goes back a whopping 150 years. Were there bigger fires in the past? Yeah, there were. Weird thing, though. Because the West, because the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevadas, because the flora and fauna in California evolved relying on fire, they bounced back from this. So the reason there are big wildfires, and they're bigger every year, because you hear that. They're getting bigger every year because of global warming. No. They're getting bigger every year because we fight them. They're getting bigger every year because they have more fuel every year because we put them out. Nobody put them out 200 years ago. And the prior 200 million years, nobody put them out. The Jeffrey pine, the sagebrush, the creosote bush, all those things literally rely on fire. They rely on fire as part of their life cycle, but we put them out. We made these fires bigger than ever. The West, Yosemite, Yellowstone, you drive through there, you think that's pristine. That's not what a forest looks like. Forests don't have a floor of collapsed timber. That's what matchbooks look like. No, forests always have that stuff burned off. We have bonfires ready to go in the West. It's got nothing to do with global warming. It's got to do with mankind interfering. But you sit down and you talk with a California Democrat about that, and they look at you like a pig staring at a wristwatch because they just don't get it. Anywho, when we come back, something ominous happened. Remember there was a North Korean defector a couple of weeks ago who was shot, and the guy brought several hundred roundworms with him. Another defector crossed through the demilitarized zone last week, not shot, but his physical examination showed something, and it's that he's been inoculated for anthrax. So that means one of two things. One of them is really, really scary. And it's, never mind the nuclear threat, did the North Koreans go cheap and weaponize anthrax and fill a bunch of artillery shells with that? Washington Post says they did. We'll talk with a former Delta Force operator, Tom Bigley, when we come back about the difficulty of, what do you do about a problem named North Korea? That and more coming up. It is Bryan filling in for Buck Sexton. You've got America Now.